whatever the township had or lacked and the city had, it became equal. We had, I don't care what, whether it was planning department, engineering department, utilities, sanitary sewer, water department, they all became one, and the township benefit was all those departments offered the township area or the township residents the very same service. Both, I mean, the city's people got the same service as the township people after the merger.
But you had a lower population than the city, and yet you had a majority on the new city commission.
We had no merger of equals.
But I'm saying, going forward, for the next 4, 6, 10 years, the township people seem to be more involved, weren't they?
We realized real quickly that 14 people, an even number, was not very workable. So the city commission, we appointed a charter commission, and they came up with the proposal for a new charter, which gave, we went to the ward system because we wanted to make sure that it wasn't overbearing about township people, maybe possibly being all elected. So went to an at-large and ward system in the new charter, and that charter was presented and that was accepted. So we had three at-large commissioners and 4 ward commissioners on the new. No, it's 9, isn't it?
No, it's 5 wards and 4 at large.
5 and 4.
3 city
I chaired
wards.
that commission.
Okay. Hey, John, then you cover it.
Okay, yeah, what happened, John?
Well, as Al said, the 14 number was too large, and so the city commission did vote to set up a charter review commission to make a recommendation, and it was well populated by residents from both the former township and the old city. And in particular, we had 3 people who are among the anti-merger who were on the Charter Review Commission. From the very start, there was strong feeling that there needed to be some structure that ensured that different parts of the city would always have representation on the city commission. And the real question was 7 commissioners or 9 commissioners, which is the right number? And it was felt that the different areas of the city, given how much larger the city was geographically, couldn't adequately be represented with 7. The idea was to have 4 ward commissioners and 3 at-large commissioners, so the number 9 was ultimately proposed with 5 ward and 4 at-large. And that's the situation that exists now. The nice thing is that the mayor, who is elected by the commissioners, is not a direct popular election of the mayor in our city. It's a commission-elected mayor. Can come from any one of the commissioners. It does not have to be an at-large commissioner who is elected mayor. So sometimes we have a commissioner from a ward who's the mayor. Sometimes we have a commissioner from the at-large. And I think that tells each commissioner that he or she has a citywide responsibility and ought to think citywide, which was a virtue of the commission that existed prior to the merger, where all commissioners were elected citywide and had a citywide responsibility. And this idea that the mayor can come from any one of the commissioners, I think, has kept most of the ward commissioners from becoming too parochial and seeing themselves only as my ward and not worrying about the rest of the city.
Well, the antis also tried to use this as, well, a ward commissioner never will become mayor. Well, when we went from the 14 of us became, when we had to re-elect a new city commission, out of these 14 and who else entered the races, was elected, I chose to become a ward commissioner. And I was elected in my ward. And later on, I was elected the first ward commissioner to become a mayor.
Now, a ward commissioner is voted on by only people in his
particular ward.
Correct.
Yes.
Who cannot just come from that spot, but he has to be voted on by the people.
And geographically, his ward.
Everybody in the city has a chance to vote for 5 commissioners, 1 ward and 4 at large.
Okay.
Right.
I get it.
Yeah, and you vote for your city commissioner plus 4 at large. So you can vote for 4 people. And I chose to be a ward commissioner basically because the way the people were lining up. I'm going to run for at large. I'm going to run for ward. I was re-elected each time I run, and later on, my fellow commissioners elected me mayor, and I was a ward commissioner. So that proved that a ward commissioner could be elected mayor. It didn't have to be from the at-large group.
Now, just in contrast to the township supervisor system, you had an elected supervisor who was your administrator,
Right.
right?
In the township, yeah.
In the township. And in the city, you had was it a weak mayor system with
Yes.
a
Yes.
strong city manager?
Correct.
Right. We had a city manager, and the mayor was the kind of the oversaw the run the meetings. Was the official reader. He was the PR person for the city, along with some delegate responsibilities by state law.
But
Even though-
no real extra authority than any of the other.
No veto
8
type
commissioners.
things or nothing like that. Yeah.
So it's a strong, it was a strong city manager city, and it stayed a strong city
Yes.
manager.
Yes.
And the township didn't have to worry about the chief administrator maybe being the wrong bent or changing policies or.
Because the city commission was the boss of the city
Yeah,
manager.
right,
Actually,
right.
the city commission has just two employees. There's the city manager, and they have the the city attorney.
And the
That's the
attorney.
only two employees the city commission has.
And then the city manager is responsible for all employees
That's
thereafter.
correct.
After
He's
that, yes.
responsible for running the city on behalf of the commission. And the commission is strictly a policy-making group, as they should be. They're not trained, not always trained people that are
Right.
adverse in city management or how to run municipalities. I tell you, it was me as a township trustee becoming a city commissioner. It was just a tremendous blessing to have a professional person, a city manager.
I see.
Really that.
You mean your packets had the relevant information and you didn't have to, that kind of
In a
thing?
way, yes, you could say it that way, but we as a township were blessed. We had some pretty good leadership. Our township planning director was kind of assisted our township supervisor, and our city attorney also was very instrumental in making sure that we stayed on the straight and narrow, but we also dealt with just the issues we were supposed to deal with as township trustees. We didn't get off into areas that we were not supposed to get off into, and I thought that was a great advantage of Wade Battle Creek Township. And I found out that we did operate much differently than most of the townships in the state of Michigan. When I went to the township, the township associations, state conventions and meetings, that we actually were operating almost like a city under township law.
Right.
And we were guided by that by the legal counsel that we had, the firm that we had hired to be our representatives. But there again, they had an interest in the township because they lived in the township
Right.
also.
What happened to the volunteer firefighters?
They all just were no longer volunteers.
They-
And,
Did any of them get full-time jobs with the fire
one of
department?
them. Only one went full-time. There's still a couple of grumbling. 28 years. I see them every time. You screwed me out of a job. But one thing I want to point out, the township, we were blessed because we had some pretty well qualified people working in our different departments: the police department, the fire department, our utilities department, planning department. Every one of those people, when they became employees of the city, the new city, almost all but in the police department, all but 2 police officers advanced up through the ranks and became as high as commanders. In the police department, our fire department people, all but one of them took a test and moved up and became supervision. Our lady that handled the finances in our utility department ended up as the purchasing director for the city later on.
That was an angle I hadn't thought about. It created a bigger career path for the
Our township
people that
employees.
were already employees.
That's correct. And so we had pretty good qualified people that were employees of the township. And there again, I think that the city, especially the city manager, when we start talking about how we're going to bring these people together after the vote, and we're meeting 3 times a week with Chris with us, or Nelson. how this is coming together. And that was very important that we made sure that each employee was placed in the right position, especially in his area. And the city manager made sure that those departments accepted those people, and they weren't looked at down at, they would become equal people, employees. And that was very important sale point that the city manager said this is the way it's going to happen ahead of time.
Okay.
And the city commission instructed the city manager to make sure this is the way he approaches it. And I can remember talking with John before this vote took place about this. And our employees
So this
tried
was
to put
very
that at ease.
upfront at city commission meetings. then,
Well,
huh?
and I think the overarching thing that we've hinted at, but we haven't really said here, was in a lot of the discussions that took place behind the scenes by people who were pushing the agenda for the merger, was the idea that we have to win the peace. That winning the vote was only the first step, but if you couldn't win after the vote, then there was a serious problem. So there was an awful lot of commitment to this idea of how do you win the peace after the battle, because that's the most important part. And that's why things like bringing all 7 of the trustees from the township onto the city commission were done. That's why all the employees of the township became city employees. That's why we set up a structure for electing ward commissioners that didn't exclude the possibility of a ward commissioner becoming a mayor. That's why companies put their savings into escrow, and everything was about, at the end of the day, there has to be a piece that most citizens, the vast majority of citizens, can embrace and say, we feel good after the vote, as well as feeling good that the vote was important for us to participate in and vote for.
But leading
Well
up to
put,
all
Jeff.
this, the approach that the township had for building the mall along the I-94 corridor. And I can remember Chris, and you'll remember this very well, arranging a meeting with what we call Serial City Development Corporation, which is a group that which the city commission had created to help to redevelop downtown.
Yep.
And with the mall developers pushing us, and we know and being advised that we can't deny them for permits, we can't deny them, we can make sure they build the way we want. Set back as far as restrictions that legally could be applied, but we couldn't delay the mall. But the city wants us, can you delay us? And we were approached, can you delay your mall people? Because we want to build a new motel and arena downtown.
Right.
And so they jumped forward, and the Miller Foundation, which was the catalyst of building their new hotel and the arena downtown, along with many other major players in finances, they went ahead and says, could you delay the mall people so we can get this started downtown? We need to save downtown. I was one that said, hey, if we got a body without a heart, we're not going to live.
Mm-hmm.
I felt we had to have a core city, which was the heart, I felt, of the city. And that's the position I took. Fortunately, I had 3 other township trustees out of the 7 that felt the same way. So we really felt that we would do what we could. And Chris arranged a meeting with Serial City Development Board. And I can remember a gentleman by the name of Jim McQuiston telling, we sit down, and that's when they asked, can you find some way you can delay them so we can build this hotel? And there was going to be a part of that was going to be a retail marketing area, plus the arena. And we said, well, how do we do this? And Chris was trying to engineer what we could do, but still cooperate. And this was taken on before this was even presented to us, and how we could cooperate. But I can remember Jim McQuiston said up to me and says, Sonny boy, I want to tell you something. There will never be a mall in Battle Creek Township. And he was right. There's no Battle Creek Township. I remember at that meeting.
By the time it opened, it was in the city,
Yeah, never be. But the merger took place before the township opened. The mayor at the time, state mayor, he cut the ribbon for the new mall. So there never was a mall in Battle Creek Township. It was under construction, but I can never. And that was kind of a statement that really stuck in my mind. And, I remember Chris. We walked out of that meeting. Chris says, "You just got spoken to by one of the powers of the new city of these passes." Remember that?
Yeah, Jim McQuist said, "Get your ducks in a row," and he did.
But there was some tremendous leaders in the community at that time that, and some of them lived in the township. I know Mr. Miller from the owner or publisher of the newspaper. You could talk with him, but he lived in the township, but he was a great supporter of the city. You could go to Jim McQuiston, who was probably the father of the Valley Creek Public Schools, retired Kellogg executive. But there was a core of about six or eight gentlemen you could go to, and if they said this would be good for the city, it was a possibility to make it happen.
So really, as I read this, you folks haven't had the chance. I think you'll enjoy reading it, but Linda Ann Pope did a nice job in making a chronicle of everything that happened. But one of the statements she said is that it was almost inevitable that you got together in an annexation. But what I'm hearing from you, you're operating on 4-3 votes through a good share of this.
Not necessarily. It was unanimous most of the time. And only when it come to real emotional issues that the antis were really.
No, I mean for the annexation, it was not inevitable. You needed 5 or 6.
It was more 5-2 vote in the township.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. The one vote switched over fairly early. I would say by the end of June that the 5th vote was solid with in favor of the proposal that the Kellogg Company had given of the annexation. But we were operating with the 5-2. The 2 never did come around, and they never run for office again. Dale Snyder was the one that swung about a month or so after this became a public issue.
I see.
The 4 of us, the supervisor, the clerk, the trustee that was a school teacher, and myself were the ones that were solid behind it. And Dale Snyder come and joined us as far as seeing what this would do for the city. And he happened to have a business in the city itself at the time, but lived in the township. And but he was a very nice gentleman that really could see what possibilities, what this could do economic selling wise. I and the other trustees, the 4 of us, we looked at the airport. And one of the persons had a real interest in what the airport could do for the community. That was our city clerk at the time, and she ended up becoming the airport advisory board. We ended up saying that Battle Creek Unlimited has so much to offer us. One of the things that happened a little before this, and I think that I can tell you this, and I can't remember the year. I think it was like 1980 or 81. 1,300 acres, I believe, or 2,300 acres that was in that military property. That was Fort Custer became available, access, and of course it was Battle Creek Township.
Yeah.
And so we were contacted by the federal government. Their people handled their disposal. We had first right of refusal to buy that property, and we waived, and that was the unanimous vote by the township to waive it because we had no finances to buy that from the federal government, and gave the first rights to the city of Battle Creek. And that was the first start of Fort Custer Industrial Park. Actually, it was going to be an amusement park to start with, but that thing all went by the wayside, became an industrial park. But that was a case where we just did not have the facilities, did not have the expertise or the money to take advantage of some beautiful property close to I-94 for industrial park. We waived and give those rights to the city. The city jumped on them. They bought the property from the federal government, and
Because they were set up to do it, and you weren't.
And we could
as a
not do it.
township.
And that was the type of thing that helped sway are thinking, and I think it helps sway a lot of the people in the township when it comes actually down to pulling the lever and say, I'm going to double my taxes. I'm going to vote yes for this. But those are the type of things that, that we had at that time, still had at that time, a commercial airline. We had people. Later on, when I was mayor, we waived the right to have a commercial stop. It's 20 miles apart. An airplane leave Kalamazoo and land here, the same airlines, and so forth. But the trade-off was that the airport that now has passenger service is called the Battle Creek Kalamazoo International Airport. It's not called the Kalamazoo Battle Creek. And that was one of the concessions that I negotiated, Jim Hettinger and I negotiated with, and Chris, we know, with the County Board of Kalamazoo to rename that airport. And we said we would give up our airport service. But our commission at that time, we voted, yes, we'll give it up, and develop our airport into our National Guard and a more industrial base. They got the commercial traffic.
I'm going to have to, we didn't really get into the economics here, and I think we're going to have to rely on Jim Hettinger and Joe Stewart and those folks.
You could not ask for a better guy to talk to about economic
We'll try to get that information included in the video, and but I did want to read this summary from 1983 that Ms. Pope put together. She did a fine job, and I'd like you folks to comment as we wrap up. In an era when people want to escape from the problems and decadence of central cities, the idea of annexation is very unappealing. However, if some particular conditions exist, chances for a successful annexation campaign are greatly enhanced. A perceived crisis is the greatest catalyst for any change within a community. Perhaps this is the only reason the merger succeeded in Battle Creek Township and Battle Creek City. Or perhaps the public thought that unity was the best policy and would have voted in favor of the annexation regardless of Kellogg's position. Who can really know for sure? In Battle Creek's case, there is still a lot of bitterness among those who feel the community was blackmailed. Regardless of whether the Kellogg proposition was the only reason the merger passed, the people did vote, and the community as a whole made a decision to remain the cereal capital of the world. What do you think about that?
It's absolutely correct.
One quick statement on this, and then we'll let when I see her summary here, the Kellogg Company location of headquarters was the catalyst, and probably, if I had to say, was 55% of the reason people did vote yes. The other issues were, I thought the Kellogg leverage to keep that headquarters here was a majority of why the people made their decision to vote. The 68% that actually voted for a merger, and 45% of the other issues. But whether another community can pull this off and make it happen like this, I could talk about the advantages and the benefits of it till the sun goes down 24 days from now. But as far as why the people have to do it, I don't know. It's going to be awfully tough without having that leverage thrown at you.
Some people might think it's blackmail, but if you think it through, it was a sound position for the company. They're going to build a new world headquarters. They wanted to be in a community that was moving forward. They wanted a community where they could attract leadership. And they knew that if the merger did not take place, it was not going to be good for Kellogg. And they were very open about it. I think that the community looked at that and said, we want Kellogg to be here. Because we could have voted it down, we could have let him go, but it was not in the best interest of the community. And using the lame term blackmail, I can understand why the writer might use that term, but
They were when she wrote this.
Yeah,
Winter of '83.
That was a year later.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a lot of bitterness among people in the community at this point.
I have trouble finding anybody that said they voted against the merger. Now,
If this was blackmail, the blackmailer, after the blackmail, spent more than $1 billion in this community in plant and other improvements. And I think it's fair to say that, besides the world headquarters, I think it would be fair to say that the likelihood that the oldest and at the time largest plant that the company had here in Battle Creek, whether it would have been expanded that much if world headquarters wasn't here is very problematic. But because world headquarters was here, because the merger of equals, like I said, $1 billion with a B of expenditure just in that plant on Porter Street, and hundreds of millions of dollars beyond that, and then more industry in relation to that.
so $30 million headquarters end up with $77 million.
Yeah, so the blackmailer paid a lot of money. So to call it blackmail is
I think it's pretty strong.
it was nice rhetoric. I don't blame her for using the word, because there were certainly those that said it, but it was far better for the community than it would than not. So.
Last word, John?
Well, I think, given that this was written in the winter term
Yep.
of 1983, which would have been really the first quarter in which this merger was operational,
Yep.
the feelings associated with the campaign and the election were still right there on top. I was involved in numerous Kellogg meetings. I was an executive with Kellogg at the time, talking about how Kellogg should talk to the community about its role in this merger. And the word blackmail really hurt inside Kellogg, but it was a word that was used quite a lot to suggest that people ought to vote against this merger. So I think the author of the document, Ms. Pope, has caught the flavor of January or February 1983 in terms of what the tensions and feelings were. But I agree with Nelson. We are way past that kind of energy in our community now. I think this has been accepted by the whole area, even those who weren't involved in the vote. Penfield Township, Emmett Township, even the city of Springfield. This was a good thing. This is something that should have happened, and no one now would think about blackmail as a way to describe the events of 1982.
This town has progressed so much because of that annexation and merger. As far as economic development, we have retail that's available to our people now we never had before. Far beyond what was planned at the time as just a township. I mean, just so far beyond. We even created a downtown development authority in the township, the first one in the state of Michigan. To help facilitate the building out there. We've been involved right from actually before the merger. Township residents, township people were involved with the economic development arm of the city of Battle Creek, as far as on their board, voting members of how economic development was taking place. But also, like Nelson said, the company just went far beyond what they thought. But I think the number one person that we need to thank as a visionary and what this could do is Bill LaMoth, who at the time was CEO, chairman of the board of the Kellogg Company. He visioned a unified city, a progressive city, that I can tell my board of directors, let's build our headquarters here. And if there's any one person we can put a finger at, and to this day, he is the most down-to-earth gentleman you'd ever want to talk to. And he will talk for hours about Battle Creek. He just is a person that just had a vision. I want this city to be something I can be proud of after I'm gone. My grandchildren say my grandfather was involved with making this happen.
I gotta ask.
I guess, Chris, I think you could...
I echo that, and Bill LaMoth and his wife have done more for this community than people know as far as supporting it and creating opportunities and financially. So I agree with
He's the
Al.
one person, but there again, the committee that was formed to support it and tried to sell it. There was a group in the city that John chaired, there's a group in the township that all looking for this. They all were great and very instrumental and very important people at the time. But the one person that stepped out and put his name on the line, put his reputation on the line, this company's reputation on the line, and then produced afterwards was billable. And,
It's not easy.
I thank goodness today I could call him a friend.
Not easy for a corporation to start giving instructions to the government. To openly tell them what they want them to do.
They said, here's the issues, now you guys work it out. They didn't come back
That's
and
right.
dictate all during this time.
Right.
They didn't?
During this issue, they said, here's the issues, here's what we're gonna do, you folks work it out. Now, sure, there was people behind working with the people for it and so forth.
Right.
But as far as the companies making statements day after day after day
They
during
didn't.
all this turmoil, all this they did not step
Okay.
forward and take part of the debate.
Okay.
They were very professional. That's
Very
why they're
ethical,
the company
very-
they are right now. And that's why the name Kellogg is so prominent in this town. The company, the Kellogg Foundation, which is actually owns a large percent of the Kellogg company itself, they're so supportive of this community now. They still are because of the community responding
Because
to
of
what
what
their
happened.
what their needs were. Now, they have responded to that, and I think that the community did. The community stepped forward and said, "Yes, we want you to stay with us." And John, you know how that worked out.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody else?
Nelson, you could come maybe a little bit more on the economic development because you've been so much involved in so many of the different things that have happened because of this that would not have happened. Maybe you can just pop off a couple of the large things that have happened because of that.
Well, certainly the Kellogg Company expanded its facilities, not only the manufacturing world headquarters, but they added their what they call their Food Institute, Food Safety Institute and Research Institute, a major player downtown, in fact, and many other suppliers to the Kellogg Company were able to remain in business and grow, and the industrial park grew exponentially as a result of this annexation and the opportunities that it created. And what used to be a 2-lane road through cornfields, Beckley Road, is a major 4-lane road with growth beyond whatever the township could have imagined in 1977 and 1980. And all of that was a result of principally the greater synergy, the word Chris used earlier, of having a strong township and a strong city working together instead of fighting at the edges about who was going to get the mall or who was going to get the commercial development downtown. And this will be a daunting task for any other group of governments to take on, and it certainly got easier when you had the opportunity that the Kellogg Company presented, but those don't come along all that often. And it'll be interesting, anybody that tried to duplicate this.
Okay. Well, I think we've done a good job covering this subject, and I just want to tell you all what a privilege it's been for me to meet you all, and I am one of the few people that know what you're involved in and how difficult it is to bring together pieces of the community, and it's really, you've done an extraordinary job down here, and I appreciate the opportunity to meet with all of you.
Well, thank you for the
Wish
opportunity.
Traverse City luck. I happen to have a cousin that lives up there in Acme, and he's a businessman up there. And I could see where Traverse City could benefit from some way of cooperating better together, whatever method they end up doing it. I understand what you have been talking about up there when you first contacted me.
Good luck to you in your efforts,
Oh,
John,
thank
and
you.
if there's any way we can help, we'll be glad to.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up here.
I'll be
I
glad to
don't know
come
if
up
this
there and go
camera-
fishing with my cousin and talk to your people.
I appreciate the opportunity to meet with everybody, and I appreciate everybody that watches this, and thank you for watching. I'm here with Peter Christ, who was mentioned in our panel discussion. He wasn't able to be here at the panel, so we're handling this separately. He was talked about a little bit in the video. Peter was on the Boundary Commission at the time this annexation thing, the last phase of it began. So thank you for taking the time, Peter, and helping me out with this.
Sure. Happy to do it, Jack.
Can you tell us all what happened In 1982, 1982.
Okay. You've heard, of course, from the panel the steps and the process that we went through. I had been involved in the process. In the 1966, we'd had a consolidation effort where we attempted to bring not only Battle Creek Township and the city together, but the city of Springfield and the four surrounding townships. And I ended up chairing that activity as a relative young man in the community, but it ended up being a chairman by default because it was a matter of I hadn't created enough enemies for anybody to distrust me. But the experience of being involved in that consolidation attempt provided me with a great background on local government and how our townships function, how the city functioned. And and it became apparent that we were our own worst enemies in some cases.
Well, you mentioned to me that you were kind of evangelist for I don't know if you use that word, but I took it to be you were kind of an evangelist for consolidations.
Yes, and part of what we discovered is that most significant change, I found, takes place only if you have a crisis that doesn't permit you to keep functioning the way you are, or you end up with a compelling vision that people really want to be part of. And what I discovered is that, for the most part, people tend to talk about the mechanics and the logistics and the how. And the real issue is that people buy benefits. They don't buy features. So they need to understand, why would this be better? If we were to do this differently, what would be, how could we have a better community? So visualizing and helping make real what would be the benefits of a consolidation or of a joining together of governments. I became a fan of consolidation because the annexation process basically says you take what we have, one unit of government annexes all or part of another unit of government, but that's a control piece, so that the larger unit typically takes over the smaller unit, and in one way or another. And the existing governmental framework is the same. In the consolidation process, what you do is you really create a new governmental entity. You take the parties that are involved, and you have a kind of a clean slate.
So my video is titled Annexation, but really what I'm suggesting that Traverse City look at is more of a consolidation than an annexation. An annexation implies one unit joining another, or parts of one unit joining another. And consolidation is a lot of units, or
it's multiple units, 3 or more. It could be 2 or more. Even you could have a consolidation with 2 units of government, 2 or more. But the difference is you create in the consolidation process a new charter that says, let's start from scratch. You can take what has been there and take the best of what exists and get rid of the worst of what may be in the present system. But you have a whole new group of people energized, creating a vision for what would our new community look like, and what would our new governmental structure look like. And then the people in the final vote, because it's a 2-vote process in consolidation. The first is the intent to create a new unit of government, and all units that are involved must say yes, and each unit votes separately on that first vote. Then simultaneously with that, each unit is run, individuals within the various units are running as charter commissioners. So they run, and and if the proposal passes, the charter commissioners then meet, and they have a timetable, I think it's roughly a year, to come in with and propose a new charter. And then you have a second vote where the people are saying, okay, so this is what we're talking about, this is the governmental structure, this is what it looks like, this is how commissioners get elected, and then you have the second vote, and the new charter then goes into effect.
So this actually involves direct public votes.
Oh, absolutely.
On two separate occasions.
Yes. Yeah.
So you kind of do all the political jockeying and everything to get the first vote.
Yes.
And then there's unanimous consent of all the townships and cities. Then you start over.
Then
you do a document that says how things should be.
Yes.
And then a year later or so, you vote on it.
Yes. And what it does is it also gives you an opportunity, and you heard in the panel talking about all the work that went on with how do we merge our fire departments, how do we merge our police departments, what are the mechanics of how we do these things. Well, those discussions can take place during the charter writing process, and you have time for the discussion between the units of between the representatives of the governmental units of saying, if we are going to create a single new entity, how do we do that? Mm-hmm. We had a school. I was involved in the merging of two school districts, and part of what we had to do before we ever got they'd been meeting for 18 months and nothing essentially was happening. We raised one single question, which was, if we were to merge these two school districts, will the kids in both districts get a better education? That's the fundamental bottom line. And if the answer to that is yes, then we should leave no stone unturned to make this consolidation happen. If the answer to that is no, we shouldn't be meeting.
I'm a real estate appraiser, and I've had people call me up when there's an estate, say, and I know a guy that he inherited 120 acres. He said, I want to keep it. It was part of the family farm, but I don't, I'll be poor if I keep that land. And I say to him, listen, the only way to look at this, it's an asset. Now, if you didn't have that 120 acres, would you go out and buy it? Or would you rather keep the cash? And it's just a matter of which would you prefer. And he said, well, when you look at it that way, no, I wouldn't go buy that 120 acres. I would.
Right.
I'm better off with the cash.
Sure.
And when you look at the government, when you look at our local government, and you say, well, if you could design a new system or keep the old one,
yes,
which would you prefer? Would you design the same system you have today if you were starting from scratch?
Yes.
And I think the answer is pretty obviously no.
That's right. That's right. Most of us would not. And part of the issue that we deal with is our current governmental structures were created well over 100 years ago. They've been around for local government. And township government was really designed to serve a primarily rural population without the urban centers. Then what we have done is we've gone beyond the city boundaries, and we create a high population density, and so we create a need for the kinds of services that were designed to be provided by a city, but we are asking a governmental unit that was designed to serve a relatively sparser population in a more rural area now to provide those urban services.
Well, there's been a lot of laws passed that allow townships to function like cities. In fact, Battle Creek Township was functioning like a city, right?
And they were functioning close to a city, but as Al Bobrovsky pointed out, they still didn't have sufficient revenue and didn't have the organizational structure. And then you find we've got the duplication, and we're saying, so why, when we had a study, and this is one of the other things I would highly recommend, is that if this is going to be looked at seriously, having some organization like the Citizens Research Council or one of the universities do a study that really says, what could we accomplish if we really wanted to be one? Well, when we had that study done, we found that the location of fire stations, as an example, if you're serving a larger area, then I can place things in a different way so that I don't need as many, but I can still service the area. And how do I provide the services that are needed without, and part of what the challenge we ran into was, how do you serve both the urban and rural population if you take in the entire governmental unit?
The question, though, the $54,000 question is, don't you lose local control? I mean, people are fond of their townships, right?
Yes, and the issue becomes one that says that's not unsolvable. That's a value, in my opinion, that becomes more of a value item than it does a real problem. When do most people assert themselves? When they have a problem, when they've encountered they either need something from the governmental unit, or something has happened to them and they want relief from it. Most people don't show up at township meetings or city meetings or what have you unless there's something happening that directly impacts them.
I get your point. So if there's trouble in a neighborhood,
yeah,
and that whole neighborhood shows up at the city commission meeting,
they get attention.
It doesn't matter whether it's 15,000 people or 50,000.
Exactly.
They're going to get attention.
And so then it becomes, what's the attitude of the governmental unit in terms of its relationship with its citizens? So if here's a group that says, we care about this particular issue, well, that's not in isolation. Now I got to look at, okay, how does that impact other people? Perfect example, in the city of Battle Creek, we were going to be it was Battle Creek Township. One of the issues we had to deal with, especially when the new mall went into the township, was we had to widen roads. Well, one of the major thoroughfares, Capitol Avenue Southwest, was a residential street. Yeah, it's some beautiful homes, and it was a two-lane street. Well, once you start funneling all the traffic that wants to get out to the mall, that two-lane street doesn't work anymore. If you now widen it, which was one of the proposals, to 4 lanes, traffic patterns, pedestrian traffic, kids walking to school, all those things change dramatically if you try to create a 4-lane street. So there was a huge issue in the community. One of the interesting things was the city was smart enough to survey people from all parts of the city, not just those living on the street. Interesting response. Most of the people who responded said, we're glad, that didn't live on Capitol Avenue Southwest, said, we're glad you asked us for our opinion. Here's what we think, but we hope you will listen first and most carefully to the people who live on Capitol Avenue, because they're the ones going to be most heavily affected. And everybody was surprised at that response, because they assumed everybody that didn't live there would say, put in the 4-lane street.
Yeah, ram it through. Yeah.
They didn't. They were responsive, saying, if I were living there, how would I want to be treated? What they did was they came up with a compromise that has worked very effectively. They built a 4-lane highway and striped it for 3 lanes, with the center lane only being used as left turn on occasion. So if they ever really needed to go to 4 lanes, the road was built to accommodate 4 lanes of traffic, but they use it now. It's still basically 2 lanes, much wider street, and occasionally put in a left turn.
Now that's an example where professionals,
yes,
if you have competent professionals, you can generate a lot more solutions than just
yes,
your township board members who are maybe part-time people,
yes,
largely part-time people.
yes.
It's just hard to give the attention to the problems that
Yes.
they really deserve.
Well, and that would have been a perfect example. I'm not sure the township government, because at that time, because of the staff and the amount of staffing they had, they would have had to deal with that same problem because that section of the road went right through the heart of Battle Creek Township, and traffic was going to get on there to get to the mall anyway. So either the mall's going to suffer or they're going to have traffic congestion and a lot of people unhappy.
And township government might not have been set up to deal with it as well as
the city engineer who is managing urban streets all over the city and saying, okay, this is one more now as part of the process, but trained professionals.
I was a sewer and water guy.
Yeah.
I didn't plan it that way, but we had a major groundwater contamination just about the day I was elected in the primary. It was called Avenue E, and
Yes.
it was similar to the over by Niagara, the not 3 mile, but it was a big
Right.
love canal.
Yes,
And
sure.
East Bay Township, Avenue E were going
Okay.
on at the same time. And so suddenly I became a sewer and water guy, and I realized the importance of sewer and water. And this is a profession. There's a lot of people, engineers,
Oh, yes.
utility maintenance people, who dedicate their lives to figure out the best way to do that. And our county DPW has taken a track of trying to keep expenses low, personnel low. They have all new, at least 30 years ago when they built everything, they had all new equipment, so they didn't have to worry about maintenance.
Sure.
But now, they're really bumping in. We built an $8 million septage plant that, could have been done for less than $1 million if they'd cooperated with each other, and
Yes.
with the city. So, and they cut a big water main that I thought, was essential for the regional development. Sure. And so we've had just a lot of failures in the utilities.
Yes.
And you can't point your finger at one bad guy that did this.
No, and that's part. It's not bad intention. It's the system that we operate under now doesn't reward collaboration or cooperation. Everything is set up for a competitive model, and the guy on the other side of the line is the enemy.
Yeah. Now Harper, was it
John Harper?
John Harper said that.
That's right.
He said, I looked at these township
Absolutely.
guys were the enemy.
Yes, and the fact is, people who could sit down at the same table and talk to each other, one of the things we found in some cases was people don't know each other on a personal basis. And so bringing them together and talking, and it's saying, but our structure, and we find the same thing over and over again, not just in governmental units. When you look at our schools, the structure is set up to reward competition, and there is nothing to incentivize collaboration.
Well,
or working together.
the media rewards competition.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. They're constantly looking for the confrontation or the problems, focus on the problems, not on the solutions.
Let's get back to this
Sure.
consolidation
Yep.
discussion that has to take place.
Right.
What people don't realize is that anytime there's a change where you've got a contract, like for our sewer plant
Yes.
is owned by 5 townships and the city, right?
Right.
And suddenly one township is approaching the capacity of what it needs. Now that we had like a 2% rental. We had to rent 2% of the sewer plant from the city.
Okay.
Now, when that happens, the lawyers and the engineers, they start supporting their own units.
Yes.
Because what happens is you've got to reallocate the costs. And this township is going to have a bigger bill, and some other townships are going to have a smaller bill, and the city's going to have a little different angle on it. And so all of a sudden the negotiation kicks in about, why should he pay more? Why should he pay less?
Yes.
And then you can even get, you're making out on the police service, or you're making out
Yes.
on the fire department, so we're not going to let you make out on this one. This time we're going to get our share, and so that negotiation takes place
Yes.
whenever there's a change.
Yes.
So
And-
the same
And it slows down the process, and it pits people against each other, as opposed to looking at the bigger picture of saying, okay, if we were a single unit of government, how would we deal with this? And that's why the concept of having a professional either, as I say, Citizens Research Council or one of the universities doing a study that kind of says, because they don't have those constraints. So you have kind of it's not a formal plan because it hasn't been adopted yet. Nobody has the authority to implement it. But it begins to create a vision of, so if we were one unit, what would be different or what could be different? And then people tend to want something more tangible. They're kind of saying, please tell me what it's going to be like. And so this whole concept of people buy benefits, not features. If you think it's a good idea to consolidate, my first question is why? Okay. Mm-hmm. And so I need to answer some of the whys, not in a theoretical thing, but here's a very practical. I started to use an example earlier about this railroad consolidation thing that was tied in. Well, one of the issues was one of our local investors wanted to build a hotel downtown. They were saying, with the traffic patterns the way they are now, it will never sell. We'll never be able to do that. So this railroad consolidation effort, which people had talked about for 50 years, all of a sudden became a possibility and a reality, and it was accomplished. But in the process of doing that, one of the things we found was people had mental images that they weren't ready to let go of. And so at one of our public meetings, somebody said, well, you're putting this bridge in the wrong place. And we couldn't figure out why. We'd gone through the logic. And they simply said, well, finally said, in exasperation, said, well, if you were putting a bridge someplace, where would you put it? And they said, well, we'd put it right on Division Street. That's where the problems are. That's where the backups are. That's where we always get stopped. I said, oh, okay. Would you like to know why we didn't put it there? And he said, yeah. And he said, when the consolidation is completed, there won't be any railroad tracks there. That's what we're talking about when we talk about consolidation. Now, we had pictures, charts, graphs, and everything, but everybody had this mental image of being stopped at that spot. And they said, oh, you mean you're going to take those tracks out? I said, yep. And then the next answer, then the question was, okay, knowing that there aren't going to be any tracks there, now where would you put the overpass? And the response from the guy was, exactly where you have it. I said, okay.
So nobody's going to support you until they're confident that the change is going to be better.
Yes, and that's what they're looking for. And how's it going to be better? And what does this mean to us as a community? One of the things we ran into when we were looking at the consolidation thing, you were talking about appraisals. We were talking about trying to recruit businesses and industry into the community. Between our 5 school districts and 6 governmental units, there were at least 36 different taxing parcels, so areas. So if somebody came in and said, well, what will be my property tax rate? The issue was, I can't tell you unless I can identify the specific property. Well, and it's one of those 36 intersections.
And that's, if somebody wants sewer and water in Traverse City, they'll call up the city, of course.
Sure.
And the city will say, well, that's in the township.
Yes.
You got to call the county. Okay, so they call the county and they go, well, that's in Garfield Township.
Right.
You got to call the township supervisor. And the supervisor will explain to you that, I'm simplifying this.
Yes.
And I'm not sure how Garfield works, but at some point they're asked to put up an escrow so that the private engineering firm that we contract with is going to go study what you propose to do and tell you what you're going to need to do it. And the guy says, well, I'm not even sure I want to move to Traverse City. Why do I put up an escrow?
Yes.
Whereas if you had an engineering department that knew the region and had people on staff that knew what it took to put in the utilities, you could have an answer for that guy. I'll switch you to engineering. Yeah. Oh, you're in that area. Well, at some point we're going to need a pressure something, and this is what you're going to need. And 10 minutes later, the guy says, okay, I think I know enough that I can
That I'm
investigate.
either interested. or
I'm
not.
interested or not. But how many times has our city been looked at by people from outside and say,
And
we're
by-
not interested. We
by
don't
the
want to
time-
deal with this.
By the time they've had to deal with 3 different governmental units to get an answer and still didn't get the answer they were
Right,
looking
and,
for,
and,
they kind of say,
I got to
"Man, if
put up
that-
some money to hire a private consultant
And-
who works for the township.
And if
Yeah.
that's what it
Yeah.
looks like in this community, and I'm not even there yet, am I sure I really want to go?
Yeah, exactly. And I think, now in my opinion, Michigan is in trouble.
Yes.
Michigan is leading the country. I think this country is in trouble because government is stopping people from doing what they want to do and from just basic functioning. Our government is so unwieldy and so
Yes.
awkward that it's stymieing business. It's
Yes.
really hard to do business.
Right. And that's one of the issues that I am concerned about. And my feeling also is democracy is not a spectator sport.
Right.
If we're going to fix this, we've got to get engaged as individuals and as people in simply saying we can't passively sit back and while people know that condition exists, who's taking the initiative to do anything about it?
Well, the public has had an attitude of, thumbs up, thumbs down. That politician's good, that guy's
Yep.
bad, up, down. And they're spectators, like in the Roman Colosseum.
That's
They're
right.
watching these gladiators, and they either do the thumbs up or thumbs
Sure.
down, and they don't consider themselves a part of their own government. And
Yes.
that's what troubles me.
Yes.
So if our democracy is going to survive, the people have got to be involved and fully engaged. This process, the consolidation, leading up to the first vote,
Yes.
you've got to have a lot of people talking about what is good about township government.
Yes.
What features do we want to keep? What's good about the city?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you start looking at what's the best of both worlds, and how do we keep that? And part of it becomes a value system. The issue now is I lived in the city at the time that the process took place. I now live in what was formerly Battle Creek Township. I don't have any more difficulty getting attention or going to a city commission meeting and expressing my concerns or my questions or issues than I ever would have had at a township meeting.
It's the same.
It's the same. The difference is, how does the government respond to its citizens? Do they listen? Do they care? Do they have a process? Do they make it easy?
Let me tell you how it works. I was involved in this. I was a township supervisor for years, and I've been involved with this public access television a long time. 4 units of government: City of Traverse City, Garfield, East Bay, Elmwood, are all supporting public access television, and they do it they get 30% of the franchise fees collected in those units of government. Now, Leah is handling public access television from Manistee to roughly Cadillac and up to the bridge. All Northwest Michigan. Only 4 units of government are contributing to support this. Now, a lot of units of government are collecting a franchise fee, 5% of your cable bill. If you're in that area, 5% is usually collected as a franchise fee, and the township or the city puts this money in their general fund, and they spend it however they want, not contributing to the public television situation. You can have your board meetings on television, your city commission meetings on television. You can have private producers, individuals that care about something, like right now. I have a chance to come down here and make a video and tell the world what I'm thinking. this is a great thing. And only 4 units of government are taking advantage of that. A lot of these units are getting the franchise money, but they're not contributing it back to support public access television, to make the experience of public access TV richer. And it's not just the TV stations. I think the public access TV in Northwest Michigan is on channel 189 and 191. Kind of hard to find. We don't know how many people are watching those channels, but we do know that the Land Information Access Association has a website, and all of these videos that we're creating here can be on YouTube and be available to the world. So you can watch public access TV on 189 and 191, or you can go to the internet and see those. Go to their website. So it's a great service, and in a world where everybody's challenging your free speech, I think this is a great resource. We can't reform the whole democratic system from the presidency on down. I think we know by now that there's no special wisdom in Washington, D.C. that's going to teach us how we can govern our democracy. It has to happen at the local level, and I think this public access TV is a good way to get involved. Every year you have a budget. Your township or your city has a budget, and if they levy a franchise fee, which most of them do, they've got a little pot of money coming in equal to 5% of the revenue from cable television. And the agreement has been to put 30% of that 5% into public access TV. There's only 4 units of government have agreed to that. That's Garfield Township, East Bay Township, Elmwood Township, and the city of Traverse City. Now, there's a whole lot of townships in Northwest Michigan. There's almost 1,300 townships in Michigan. A lot of those are in northern Michigan. And then you've got cities as well. So go down to the city commission. Go down to the township hall. Find out how much of your budget includes revenue from cable television. Ask them if they want to support public access television. Just ask them. They're either going to be for it or they're against it. They're taking money out of the system, taking money out of the pockets of the people who are paying their cable TV bills. Some of those bills are very substantial. So they're taking this money and they're putting it in the general fund, and they're not putting it back into cable TV like public access. I think this is a good use for some of the money you pay in to your cable TV company. And your township and your city, they all have the ability to contribute this money to support public access TV. So this is my recommendation. Get involved, if only to look at the budget once a year. As citizens, you should be doing that anyway. You don't depend on some politician to tell you whether you're spending your money right, whether you're collecting too much or too little. Go down there, look at the budget yourself, ask some questions, and find out, do they want to support public access television or not? That's a yes or no answer. If they want to support it, put in a 30% of what you collect from cable companies. Thank you.